Chapter 9, and we start off with an excerpt from Dr. Ling's notes. It is said he came from another place, the sky maybe, a star, that he was a younger son and would not inherit territory, so he came here to find his own, long ago. He had 3 heads, each on a long neck. Each head was like a death adder with horns, you know, but the horns were bigger. But he wasn't a snake. He had legs and wings like a bat. His color was like that of the sun near the horizon. He was a very, very large, like a mountain, and he brought storms wherever he went. His breath was like lightning, and his eyes were flashes in the storm cloud. He was similar to the ancestor gods, but also unlike them. He fought with them sometimes. We don't talk about him much. When we do, we just call him Mandandare Aquenomba, meaning 3 heads. But he had a name. We still remember it. Each mother and father whispers it to their children when they are old enough. Once. Told by Basu of the remote Taza people of highland New Guinea. When they reached the surface of the ice, it had already begun to shiver and fracture. Mark and the G-Team sprinted towards the Osprey, leaping and sliding as cracks appeared, until all they could do was make one final leap from a surface that was already falling. They landed on solid ice and collapsed in a pile, as behind them the din of glaciers worth of frozen water collapsed into a sinkhole and took most of the base down with it. Maddie, but they'd been ahead of him. Casting about, Mark saw an Osprey lifting off. Not the one they'd come in. Maddie was there. He was sure of it. Emma had gotten her out, and even though that meant his daughter was again slipping away from him, the fact that she was still alive and escaping this frozen hell brought the greatest relief he'd ever felt. Whatever this was about, his daughter was safe, at least for now. Before he could begin to think what to do about that, a deep, eerie moan rose from the sinkhole, accompanied by a blast of hot air. Things were about to get worse, much worse. Monster Zero's time in the deep freeze was over. Steam and fog boiled up from the pit, and in that cloud a massive serpentine head. It was all dragon, bigger than the Osprey, and covered in dull golden scales. Long, twisting horns swept back and fanned from the skull. Devilish eyes burned in the crevice beneath its bony brow, and sharp fangs gleamed in the jaws of a snout that seemed equal parts snake and demonic horse. A forked tongue flicked in and out, tasting the air. Then another head snaked up, and a third. As he stared, paralyzed in terror, huge leathery wings unfolded, shaking off millennia of ice, blotting out the sky. The monster's whole body crackled with golden bioelectricity. Twin tails lashed through the freezing winds. A 3-headed dragon, something from ancient mythology, come to life. A hydra. You remembered Chen saying something about myths. "You gotta be fucking kidding me," Barnes said. He had signed up with Monarch not long after San Francisco. He had wanted to fight monsters. He'd known what he was doing, but this was just piling it on. First the firefight with the Anarchy dudes, then half of Antarctica getting sucked into a hole. Now a freaking dragon with 3 heads no less. It was clear of the hole now. Its spiked tail swept through one of the few structures still standing. Then all 3 heads seemed to notice them at once. "Open fire!" Hendricks yelled. The rifle spat. Traces streaked through the frigid air at the monster so big they couldn't miss, but that barely registered their efforts. Probably felt like they were throwing pebbles at it. Barnes figured they could fall back, but Hendricks looked like he was digging in. That was crazy, but it might buy a little time for Colonel Foster and Mark to get back to the Osprey. His estimation of Mark had risen considerably. He'd come back for them, knowing the asshole and his little girl would probably get away. He figured it was time to return the favor. "Chief," Hendricks said, "we've got this. Get back to the Osprey." "Hendricks! Seriously, Chief, one more gun's not gonna help. The Osprey has missiles. We can slow him down, but you have to hurry." "Okay," Barnes said. The monster reared above them. The son of a bitch almost looked like he thought this was funny. He raced with the others towards the Osprey as Hendricks and his team unloaded their pea-shooters at the prehistoric nightmare. They were probably toast, but the way he saw it, odds were none of them were going to get out of this situation. They reached the craft, got Mark in, and he climbed in after him. Barnes looked back out at Hendricks and his squad, still firing at the Titan. Griffin got the Osprey started. Her rotors began to turn. Monster Zero looked more curious than hurt as his head turned to the squad. Lightning crackled along his scaly hide, more every second, like he was charging up. "Aw, shit," he heard Hendricks say in his earpiece. Beams of golden energy crackled from all three mouths, straight onto the commandos. He saw them outlined for a second, shadows dancing, and they were gone. But that wasn't all of it. The lightning, or whatever the hell it was, surged through the ice, spreading out as it did so. It reached the Osprey just before her engines came up to speed. Sparks and raw electricity arced all over the ship, and behind his eyes everything went white. A terrible spasm jolted through him, like the worst cramp he'd ever had, but in every muscle of his body. The worst of it only lasted a few seconds, but when it was over, his heart was still doing weird shit in his chest, like it was three-legged jackrabbit trying to outrun the hounds. The engines had stopped powering up. The Osprey was dead on the ground. Colonel Foster recovered first. "This is Raptor 1 to Argo," she said into her transmitter, "requesting immediate emergency extract. I say again, urgent extract." "Oh, hell yes," Barnes quickly agreed. They did not have anything like the firepower they needed to deal with this thing. "Griffin," Sam yelled, "get us the hell out of here." Madison watched in awe as Monster Zero rose from the sinkhole, but it wasn't the same feeling as when she'd first seen Mothra. This was different, terrifying. This was no mere animal either. She could see the fierce intelligence in each set of eyes, but there was also cruelty there, and more than anything, rage. This was not a Titan they were going to coexist with peacefully, ever. It was difficult to make out what was going on below. She saw the flashes of someone shooting at Monster Zero from the edge of the sinkhole. Nearby, another Osprey was powering up, and in the light of the floods, she saw her father climbing aboard. Jonah hadn't killed him. He had escaped the explosion. But he wasn't safe. The dragons' heads reared up and spat golden lightning at them. It spidered and spread through the ice and lit up the Osprey like a sparkler. Then the craft went dark. Its rotors stopped turning. Monster Zero stooped forward to examine the damaged aircraft. "No," she yelled. "Dad!" She'd been watching everything from the sidelines, doing what she was told, trusting her mother's judgment, trying to be a good daughter to her, support her, but this was too much. She'd had a choice back in the base. She could have gone with him. Now she thought maybe she'd chosen wrong. She wasn't just going to watch her father die. She grabbed the orca and yanked it away from her mother, then ran to open the bay of the Osprey, working the controls, changing the frequency to a piercing, head-drilling shriek. Monster Zero heard it too. All three heads howled in agony. The crippled Osprey forgotten. "Take that, asshole," she thought. It was working. But of course her mother was trying to take the machine away from her. "Honey, let go," she said. She tried to wrestle it away, but Maddie Fort continued to broadcast. Monster Zero turned toward them, identifying the sound causing his pain. He started to flash and flicker as he had before he fired the soldiers. "Madison," her mother shouted, "you have to let go." Then Jonah was there, his fingers bit into her like deep steel, and between him and her mother, they forced the orca from her. Panting, she watched as her mother began powering the orca down. With the noise gone, Monster Zero lost interest in them and turned away. His charge fading, they were far from him now as the Osprey picked up speed, and from her dad. Her mum tried to put a hand on her, but she jerked away, continuing to watch the downed Osprey until Jonah's men closed the bay doors. Mark knew the source of the monster's pain, and he saw Maddie in the open bay of the other Osprey, holding the orca. He had felt a swell of pride for his girl, quickly followed by fear. If she didn't stop, the beast would electrocute her as it had Hendrix and the rest. But then the noise stopped. Monster Zero broke off his attack. The Osprey with his child and ex-wife vanished into the Antarctic sky. At least Maddie was safe for now. The Osprey suddenly rocked half over. Monster Zero had renewed his interest in them. One of his heads loomed in the side window. A second head struck them from the front. Then the roof began to buckle in. Windows shattered as the Osprey frame bent. It was taking its time, Mark realized. Monster Zero could have breathed on them again or crushed them in an instant. Godzilla clocked in at 90,000 tons, and this horror looked bigger than the Big G. No, it was killing them slowly, savoring their terror. Quick or slow, their fate was sealed. Stanton was praying, Sam was bracing for the inevitable. The one still point was Chen. She looked completely serene, ready to accept whatever happened. He didn't understand it, but watching her, his breathing evened out and grew deeper. The drum of his heart lessened in tempo. The metal stopped protesting. The pressure came off as all three heads rose up on their snaky necks, sniffing, smelling something. It vented a particular hiss. Monster Zero sounded almost afraid. Mark followed the beast's six-eyed glare. Blue light shimmered below the frozen surface, building in strength as the ice buckled, melted, cracked. The Osprey rattled about like a penny on a drumhead. The ice sheet exploded upward, followed by a tremendous form, dorsal spines cracking through with blue energy. Godzilla. The huge lizard faced Monster Zero, opened its jaws and roared. Monster Zero shrieked back from all three throats, charging up its own bioluminescence. Mark remembered Viviani's comment about the Titan being like gorillas, beating their chest, except these gorillas were millions of years old, hundreds of feet tall, and not gorillas. But there was clearly a grudge there, maybe one that went back 250 million years or more, and here they were in their tiny craft caught between them. Godzilla charged, so did Monster Zero. They slammed together, hundreds of thousands of tons colliding at high speed. The shockwave raced over the ice and hammered the Osprey. Mark felt the sting of it in his ears, and even through the metal hull, the air itself felt like a slap in the face. "Everybody hold on!" Colonel Foster shouted. It wasn't clear which talon or tail struck them, but it sent their crumpled craft tumbling across the ice until they fetched up against an outcropping. Trying to shake the spots from his eyes, Mark saw the others climbing out of the remains of the Osprey. That seemed like a great idea, one to be emulated, but everything was spinning, and he was having trouble keeping focus. He floundered towards the opening. Someone grabbed his hand, pulling him forward, guiding him onto the ice. Viviani, he nodded his thanks, breathless. The ice shook again as Monster Zero landed a tremendous blow on Godzilla that sent him thudding into the permafrost. But the giant saurian quickly regained his footing. The spines in his tail began to glow blue, and the light moved up his spines, blazing ever brighter until it reached his head. Then Godzilla's mouth gaped, and a blue beam of atomic fire jetted out. Monster Zero dodged, yanking his neck so the deadly beam threaded between them. Golden lightning crackled from the three-headed monster, striking Godzilla squarely in the chest. The reptile staggered back into the sinkhole. Energy was still streaming from his mouth as he fell. He went sideways and hit one of the few remaining buildings, blasting debris all around them. Then Godzilla vanished into the abyss. That was bad. As much as he hated Godzilla, Mark was sort of rooting for him to win this particular fight, or at least keep the other monster busy long enough to let them get away. But now Monster Zero turned his attention back to them. He and Viviny ran like hell towards the others, but he still wasn't 100%. He saw Coleman running towards them. A dragon head darted down, fangs gaping, the tiny hairs on his skin perked up, and a sharp sulphurous musk stung the back of his throat. The huge mouth snapped shut, and Viviny was gone. She couldn't be, of course. He must have seen it wrong. She must have been knocked aside or something. But part of him understood the truth, and he was next. But he wasn't. Gasping, stumbling, he made it back to the others. Viviny was nowhere to be seen. God, he thought, as the details reasserted themselves, the huge jaws closing on her, the unbelievable look on her face. Oh God, she's gone. Serizawa was staring at where she had been. He looked like someone who had just been asked a question. He should be able to know the answer, but couldn't. Then his features began to crumple in on themselves. Mark had never seen him look so beaten or broken. But Serizawa wouldn't feel that for long, or anything else for the matter, because Monster Zero was coming back for them. A plume of flame erupted on the monster, and then another, accompanied by deafening concussions. Monster Zero shrieked and gave ground. The flying cavalry had arrived, the Argo and its escort of jet fighters. Missiles screamed overhead, peppering Monster Zero with high-yield payloads. The three-headed dragon screamed again, overwhelmed by the sudden bombardment. It swept the air with its wings, swatting one of the rockets and deflecting it. It spun out of control, right towards Mark. Before he could take more than a step, it detonated. The shockwave picked him up like a giant hand and hurled him through space. For an instant, he was in free fall, and then he hit something so hard he heard his bones crushed together. Breathless, ears ringing, he lay there, knowing he had to get up, but completely unable to move. Through blurring vision, he saw a huge head rise up from behind the dragon, from the sinkhole. And then Godzilla pulled himself up and launched himself towards Monster Zero, just as another round of missiles struck the gold-scaled Titan. It was too much for the newly awakened monster. Attacked from all sides, he broke from the battle, flapped his heaven-spanning wings, and took to the sky. Then everything blurred away, and Mark didn't see anything at all. For the fourth time, Serizawa turned to say something to Viviny, who wasn't there. She would never be there again, but his heart and mind hadn't accepted it yet. They'd been working together for so long, he felt incomplete without her, half a mind. He began flipping his father's pocket watch. His father had worked for Monarch too. He had been recruited not long after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but Serizawa didn't learn that until many years later. He'd grown up believing his father worked for a cargo company. It was only when he was older that his father had taken him aside and told him the truth. That there were monsters in the world. That they had been sleeping for a long time. Now they were waking up. The detonations in Japan woke the first one. Shinomura, a festering hive colony of creatures that resembled a nematode with wings. It began preying on remote islands in Oceania. Then Godzilla appeared and began to fight it, or rather them. A torn-off piece of the first one had regenerated into a second creature. Godzilla killed one, but the others escaped. Godzilla went after it. And when they came together, the military dropped a nuclear bomb on both of them. The bomb destroyed Shinomura. For many years, Monarch believed Godzilla had also perished in that atomic inferno, but he didn't. Godzilla's role was to keep the balance. With both Shinomura's gone, he simply returned to whatever depths he inhabited. When new titans emerged decades later, Godzilla returned as well. Now he was back, and it was clear, at least to Serizawa, why. He only hoped that he could convince the others. Godzilla was not their enemy. Sound returned first, the steady roar of jet engines. Light followed more slowly, and recognition came last. Foster and the others talking somewhat near. Mark was back on the Argo, lying down. He pushed himself up slowly. He felt like one big bruise, both inside and out. Emma, Madison, Vivini, had all that been real? As much as everything ached, nothing felt broken. He struggled to his feet and headed towards the voices. They were on the bridge. Serizawa sat alone, flipping his pocket watch, not participating in the discussion. He looked kind of out of it. Vivini's death had hit him hard. They had been colleagues and friends for a long time. "Anything on the satellites?" Foster asked. "Subs have Godzilla hauling ass past Argentina," Stanton said. "We lost Monster Zero in a tropical storm over Brazil. Scanning the entire southern hemisphere so far, nothing." "Then scan the northern," Foster said. The colonel turned to Coleman. "I know what I saw, Sam," she said. "I'm telling you, she pulled that trigger." "All due respect, Colonel, you saw wrong, okay?" Coleman insisted. "She wouldn't have done that. Christ, she recruited pretty much everyone in this room." "Maybe Jonah forced her, right?" Stanton suggested. "Maybe he used Madison as leverage." Coleman stood firm. "No," he said. "It had to be someone else." Coleman had claimed to be a big fan of Emma's, hadn't he? That was obvious now, and he wasn't going to like this. "Emma," Mark told him. "It was Emma." It broke his heart to say it. Like Coleman, he wanted a way around it. Some missing bit of information that would equate his former wife. But he knew her, and he knew what he saw. Everyone went silent, and all turned around to stare at him. He was starting to get used to that. "Foster saw it right," Mark pushed on. "It was her. No one forced her to." It wasn't just Coleman. None of the scientists wanted to believe it. It was a tribute to Emma in a sense, that trust they still had in her. "Are you sure?" Serizawa asked. Mark nodded. Foster turned to face the map of the containment sites. All of them were on red alert. "First she releases Mothra," the colonel said, "and now Monster Zero. Anyone else sense a pattern here?" "Yes," Chen said, "and not a good one. It's as if she is trying to start a mass awakening." "Well," Mark said, "it's just too bad that no one tried to warn you that that was gonna happen." "Hang on, guys," Coleman said. Why the hell would she want to release them? And why would she team up with Jonah, of all people, to do it? Serizawa's face set back into familiar lines. His voice grew firmer. "We will ask her when we find her," he said, "so let's keep looking." He met Mark's gaze. He didn't say a word, but Mark understood him. It was time to set their pain aside, to be dealt with later. Now was the time to do what needed doing. Jonah's men secured their new location and began setting up for the next phase, making sure everything was patched together. Meanwhile, Emma found a room she and Madison could share. But she found Maddie sitting in an old radio room, settling in. "I thought we would stay together," she said. Her daughter didn't say anything, but continued to find places for her things. "Maddie, leave me alone," she snapped. "Look, I know you're shaken up." "I don't even know if he's alive," Maddie said. "He was there. You left him. We left him to die." "I never meant for that to happen." Tears were starting in Maddie's eyes, but she didn't look sad. She looked angry. "I don't want to talk about this," Maddie said. "I don't want to talk about anything." Emma paused, and then backed out of the room. She needed to give her some space. There was time for that now. Of course, it had been hard on Maddie, seeing Mark like that. For that matter, it had been hard on her too. She wished he wasn't involved. It only made things more difficult and complicated. Monarch must have dragged him in to help find her and Maddie through the Orca. She went on to set up a command post. She found Jonah already there. He'd been quieter than usual since Antarctica. "Dr. Russell," he said, when she came in. "Jonah," she said. She sat down with the Orca and began checking its calibration. She didn't like Jonah. She never had. And the tighter their association became, the less she could stand him. He was a fanatic with no conscientiousness and little to no empathy. For him, there was no means too dirty to see him through to his desired ends. But she needed him, and now he seemed to be, as hard as it was to believe, hurting. "I'm sorry," she said, looking at him. "About your daughter? She's nearly got us killed." "No," she said, checking back her anger. "She was only trying to save her father. She can't be blamed for that." "She can indeed," Jonah returned. "Keep her curbed, Dr. Russell." She frowned. "I meant I'm sorry about Asher," she explained. "Oh, that," he said. "You two seemed close." He shrugged. He knew what he was into, what he was risking. I've known many soldiers who died never knowing what they were fighting for. Ash died for something, so... Maybe if he hadn't tried to shoot Mark, he would still be alive, she thought. But it wouldn't serve her cause to say that, or make anything better. They had to move on, finish what they started. "You remember how we met?" Jonah asked her. "Guam, you tried to hijack the plane I was on, and tried to kill me later. And yet you came around to the one true church. You turned to me," he said. "Don't be too flattered," she said. "I knew I could never do this alone, and you were the only person I knew who was capable of this." "But that is flattering in a way," he said. "It makes me so happy that you saw the light." He didn't sound happy, but then he never did. Satisfied, he was as close as he ever got. He also wasn't right. At least not exactly. He and she shared similar goals, but the outcomes they desired were quite different. Mark's head was still pounding. He took a seat, leaned against the window, and closed his eyes, desperately trying to get just a little sleep. He couldn't, though. He kept seeing Emma pressing that button, and Maddie screaming, and Viviany eaten up by that... what to even call it. "Mark," he opened his eyes, and found Coleman sitting across from him. "What now?" he asked. "Mark, we've got to be sure." "Are we still on this?" Mark said. "Yes, I'm sure. I was married to her. He cut himself off. "I should have known," he said. "The minute you guys told me she'd started tinkering with the Orca, I should have known." "This must be really hard for you," Coleman said. "Hard, yeah." "Why the Orca?" Coleman asked. "I mean, she wanted to use it to calm Titans, and she did, at least once." "Yeah," Mark said. "When I was in her office, I found some of her notes on that. She tried to use biosonar to calm that thing. Jinshin Mushi, twice. The first time it didn't work. She just made matters worse, and got a bunch of people killed." "She learned from that mistake," Coleman said, "when she used the Orca prototype." "What else do you know about it, the Orca?" Coleman paused. "Well, I know you guys went to MIT together. That's where you first started designing the Orca, and it's where you fell in love. Emma tell you all of this?" "Sort of." "When you said you were a fan of my ex-wife, just how big a fan were you?" His blue eyes went wide. "Look, no, I mean, I should be so lucky." He stopped, drew a breath, started again. "She's a rock star," he said. "She's brilliant, wonderful. Monarch's wonder worker. What we all aspire to be, and I don't understand what happened. Why she would do this." "Do you know what happened when we tested the Orca?" he asked. "Did she ever tell you that?" Coleman shook his head. "Beautiful day on the Puget Sound. We were just going to try it. nudge them a little, herd them, make them turn a couple of times. Instead, they freaked out and beached themselves. They didn't stop at that. They kept trying to go and land, cut themselves up on the rocks. There were 5 of them. 3 of them died, because we thought it was a good idea to fuck around with nature. That's why we abandoned it. After our son died, she started talking about working on it again. It's what broke us up. Well, that and my high ethanol diet. I'm sorry. I'm getting off point, Mark said. I know her. She thinks she knows what she's doing, just like the 2 of us were so damn sure of ourselves before we killed those whales. But these aren't whales, Sam. A screw up with these monsters I don't want to imagine. Yeah, Sam said. Okay, thanks for explaining that. Mark nodded. Just out of curiosity, he said, where are we headed? Mexico, Sam replied. I hope you brought some flip-flops and swim trunks.